What's up, YouTube? This is Izzy Boy on UFC Predictions. Today I'm going to be predicting UFC 109 Relentless, Mark Coleman versus Randy Couture. I'm going to start with the main event, Randy Couture and Mark Coleman, just so we can get that out of the way, and if you want to keep watching the video, that's up to you. Mark Coleman and Randy Couture, two, of course, Hall of Famers, legends in the sport, former champions. And of course, Mark Coleman was a champion before Randy Couture, back in the Stone Age. But Randy Couture in his last 3 fights has not looked the best. Of course, against Brock Lesnar, you can't really, give him the fair chance. But against Antonio Nogueira, he wasn't looking as good. He was looking pretty good in that fight, but Antonio did outbox him, and even though Randy Couture has improved his boxing, I think that against Nogueira, who has been boxing since he was probably like 15, you could really see the flaws in it. And his fight against Brandon Vera is a very controversial win, where I personally thought that Brandon Vera was going to win. In my, if you watch the video where I made my prediction, I said that Brandon Vera would win, but they gave the win to Randy Couture back in UFC 105, and he pulled that one off. But again, Brandon Vera showed some of his flaws in his boxing. But against Mark Coleman, where Mark Coleman is more of a ground and pound guy, with his last win over Stephan Bonner, he lost against Shogun and Pedro Hizo in his last 2 fights. He's more of a ground and pound guy, so a stand-up, I'm gonna give it to Randy Couture, and the clinch and dirty boxing, Randy Couture. But if it goes to the ground, I think Mark Coleman will definitely try and ground and pound him, put him up against the cage, and punch his face in. But it's not that easy to take down Randy Couture. Both of them, of course, are great wrestlers. But if I have to make a decision, I'm going to say that Randy Couture would win by decision, and it's going to end on its feet. I don't think Mark Coleman will take down Randy Couture, and if he does, Randy he'll get right back up and just push him up against the fence and dirty box him. So now that that's out of the way, next fight, Mike Swick versus Paul Thiago. Okay, Mike Swick versus Paul Thiago. Mike Swick, his last loss to Dan Hardy was actually a very impressive fight displayed by Dan Hardy, where he showed that he's a top contender. And now we're gonna see Dan Hardy versus GSP. I think that's UFC 11. I'm not sure, I'm going off the top of my head, but that'll be. I won't make my prediction until that video. But yeah, Dan Hardy really did perform really well in that fight, and Mike Swick was trying to make a statement, but it didn't work out in his favor. Paul Thiago has had a win over Josh Koscheck. I didn't watch that fight. That was UFC 95. I didn't watch that fight, so I really can't say what he displays in his fight. I can't really criticize him on that. But I did watch his fight against Jacob Volkman, and he looked good. His boxing is very impressive. So it's against Mike Swick. It's also a stand-up battle, but just because of the experience in the UFC and in the octagon, I'm gonna give the fight to Mike Swick, probably by TKO. Just because Mike Swick is one of those guys who likes to come back, stronger after every loss. Basically, after every loss, Mike Swick has had a win streak. He lost against Chris Lieben, and he came back and had a 5 in a row win streak. He lost to Yushin Okami and had a 4 fight win streak until he faced Dan Hardy. So I think he's gonna make a statement and try to knock out Paulo Thiago. So I'm gonna give that fight to Mike Quick Swick. Next fight, one of my favorite fighters, Matt Serra versus Frank Trigg. Matt Serra, I love the guy. I love his attitude, his Italian style. I just like that about him. Frank Trigg, not one of my favorites, but I've learned my lesson when I predicted against BJ Penn and Diego Sanchez. So I'm just gonna look at the fighters. Matt Serra, of course, awesome submissions, great ground game. His stand-up's good. We saw that in the GSP fight where he caught GSP in the back of the ear, and that really shook GSP. But even then, Matt Serra swarmed on him and just, was able to finish him with ground and pound. So his stand-up is pretty good, but we haven't really seen him in the cage. So I'm really excited just to see him back in the cage, because he's one of my favorite fighters, and I was wondering where he was. I know he has several schools in his area, so he was probably doing that. But his last fight against Matt Hughes, of course, he lost, but that was a really good fight. I liked that fight. Frank Trigg, of course, has a history with Matt Hughes. His last 3 losses were by submission or TKO. His loss to Matt Hughes, George St. Pierre, and Josh Koscheck. Frank Trigg, I don't know. He's a big guy. He's 5'8", and Matt Serra is only 5'6". Frank Trigg's record is 19-7. Matt Serra's record is 16-6. So just because of the size and the reach advantage, I think that Frank Trigg is going to have a considerable advantage on the feet. On the ground, Matt Serra could pull off a submission, so it's tricky on who you're going to pick in this fight. But in the end, I'm going to go with Frank Trigg by either TKO or possibly a submission. So that's my predictions for UFC 109 Relentless. Predictions for UFC 110. That's gonna be weird saying 110, 111. Predictions for UFC 110 will be up about a week before the fight. So I want to thank everyone for viewing, subscribing, and commenting. Even though some of the comments are, gayish, sort of, but that's cool. So keep doing what you're doing. If you don't like it, there's a back button or an X right on the top right corner. It's either blue or gray. You can click it and it'll just like shut down the window. It's very useful. So I'll see you guys in UFC 110.